Well, after yesterday's video about getting a little exercise by walking up to the cabin, there were a lot of questions that people had about the cabin itself. So I thought I would try to take a little bit of time today to see if I can fill you in on that. Now, this little cabin is actually an old homestead cabin from a ranch, probably 15 miles from here as the crow flies. Now, this cabin was probably disassembled from where it stood originally, about 20 years ago. It was originally built sometime in the late 1800s. It was an original homestead cabin, and the size of the cabin is determined by the absolute minimum footprint that you had to have to qualify as an improvement on your homestead if you wanted to keep your homestead land. So there were a lot of cabins about this size. Going from memory, I think it's 14 by 22, maybe not exactly that size, but there are a whole lot of them right about that size that were built because that's what they had to build. And they had to get it up the first summer so they had a roof over their head when winter came. Now, the reason this cabin was taken down is because the people that owned the land that it was on were being charged property tax based on improvements, and apparently the tax assessor considered the old cabins an improvement. One of them, they dug a big hole next to, pushed it in with a backhoe, and it is now lost. There's probably nothing that can be salvaged of it. But somebody found out about that and said, wait a minute, don't destroy the other one, I'll come take it down. So Dave, somebody in the Beulah Valley here, took the time to disassemble the cabin, very meticulously numbered all of the logs with a code that could be recreated to reassemble the cabin in exactly the same order those logs came down. And Dave then stored this on his property for who knows how many years, finally decided he was never going to build it. So we bought the logs from Dave, took them out to our property, which was a lot further east of here, kind of out in the flatlands, with the intent of rebuilding it there. Well, the property we're living on now came available. We decided we'd rather live back in the valley where there's actually trees, and the logs moved with us and then sat up here for who knows how many years. I have no idea at this point. Completely lost track. But we finally got around to putting the logs up. I bet it's been 5 years ago. They aren't sitting on a typical foundation. There are concrete piers that have been poured because I had to mix all the concrete up here by hand. The road's just too rough to get a cement mixer up. So everything had to be hauled up on the back of an ATV or in a pickup truck and then mixed by hand. So concrete piers were the easy way to go. Floor was built. We got the logs up over probably 2 seasons with some help from friends. Got a roof on it, got the metal roofing on it a few years ago, and have been so busy we just haven't done much else. But they're pretty well protected with a roof and good overhangs on it, and they're no longer on the ground because when this cabin was originally built, the logs were placed directly on the dirt. I don't think they planned to have this thing around for 100 years. They just needed a roof over their head. And unfortunately, that means some of those original logs rotted and simply were not usable, so I had to recreate a few logs. They don't match exactly. They aren't hand-hewn like the originals. But it did get this cabin up. Now, unfortunately, that meticulous numbering system that Dave used when he originally disassembled this cabin, all those labels fell off in the years, or I should say most of them. There's probably less than a dozen of them left. And we really did not get things put back up the way they were originally, and that accounts for some of the oddities you might see in this cabin. For instance, this little bit of an odd side light on the door is because these logs don't all actually belong to the door wall. We got the door in the wrong place, so we ended up with some logs from one wall here and logs from the other wall over there and whatever, but it's sort of a confusing mess. So we're going to probably trim these top logs out here, and this will just become a side light by the front door. Certainly not an original feature, but it'll be kind of nice to let a little bit more light in by the door there. We have put a modern metal chimney that's a high temperature chimney in here, so we will be able to have a wood stove in here. The old chimney originally came out this little hole over here, and you can see that it's pretty well scorched. So somebody almost burned this place down once because the chimney for their wood stove was not very well protected, which was not at all uncommon in that day. So the reconstruction on this cabin has perhaps been a little bit haphazard and certainly way slower than I would like it to be. But it is going along, and this fall I hope to get back up here. One of the big things I need to do is put some penetrating epoxy on a few areas where the logs were starting to rot, that will penetrate into the rotten areas and stop any rot from happening. And then we'll do whatever we need to do to help stabilize that. A company called Rot Doctor has a lot of things out there that really helps restore old buildings. It's kind of like putting Bondo in your car, but it does get the job done and can help save some of the original logs. And once I get that done, then I need to put window and door bucks in. And the bucks are just heavy wood framing that will attach to the ends of the logs in the windows, which need to be trimmed because we probably didn't get all these in the original windows that they belonged in. So we got to trim them all so they're exactly the same length, same size on all three of the windows. Then we'll frame that in, that will support the logs. And once that's done, all of these boards that are bolted to the outside to help stabilize everything can probably come down. After that, the next thing that'll need to be done will probably be chinking. And chinking on something like this requires filling the gaps, and we will use modern contemporary materials that should last way longer than our lifetime. Originally, this was done with split cordwood that was then covered over with cement mortar. And that doesn't last very well. It was something that had to be repaired over and over again. So that isn't the way we're going to do this. We're going to use foam filler rod, backer rod they call it, and that will fill the gaps, insulate the gaps, and then we'll go over it with a product from Permachink, which is kind of like latex caulk, except it has a sandy texture, looks a lot like the original mortar, and it expands and contracts if the logs move with the seasons, and should never need to be replaced in our lifetime. It's what we have on the other house. Now you can notice that the gable ends of this aren't filled in. That will be framed and then covered over. It's just something I haven't done yet, but that'll happen after I get those logs stabilized and hopefully get all that done before winter sets in. So that is just a brief look at what's going on with the cabin. Hopefully we'll be up here later and I'll bring you along with me to do a video as we get some more work done on this fall. But the way things go, no promises.